hope this is all working. Let me know in the comments if you're there. I think there are a few of you, hopefully. Hi, John. How are you? Hey, cool cat. How's it going? Good. Good to hear. There's a little bit of a delay, of course, in the comments, but hopefully you can see me and hear me okay. Hello, Entropy Addict. How are you? Hope everyone's doing well today. This is the first live stream I've done in a while, so I hope there are no glitches here. Every time I do, it's because it takes, or I don't do these often. I feel like every time I start a new one, I'm like, wait, how do I do this again? I also have a piano sound. Hopefully you can hear this. Let me know. For those curious, that is actually the VSL Yamaha CFX, I think. The generous people at VSL have allowed me to test out some of their instruments, so I'm demoing them, and all of them are, you know, superb, especially the new stuff, but the old stuff too. So yeah, I wanted to do this live stream today, just, you know, just to get in the habit of doing this and to answer any of your questions if you have any for me. So I know people will trickle in over time, hopefully, and if you've got questions for me, we can just chat. I can just play some piano if you like as well. I don't know how long I'll go today, but maybe, you know, no more than an hour or so. It sounds like the sound quality is okay. The image quality is okay. Just let me know. Probably the volume is a little low, but that's just kind of the nature of live streams, at least with my setup. Hi, James. Favorite chord? I don't know. You know what's a really cool chord is anything using the acoustic scale. Do you know what that is? At least I think I know what that is. So it's a major scale with a sharp 4 and a flat dominant 7. So in C, it would sound like this. It's just like a mysterious ring to it. So basically, if you can put that chord, or you can put that scale in a chord, or make a chord from that scale, and arrange it in any way. It's got a really jazzy, sound, I think. Basically, it's like a C major plus a D major, or a C7 plus a D major chord. So there's your C7 and your D major triad. So you could also think of that as like a C dominant 7 with a 9th, with a sharp 11th, and a 13th, right? So you can call it what you want. Yeah, I call it like sort of just the collection of pitches from the acoustic scale, but jazz person would call it, like a 13th chord of some kind. Yeah, that's one of the things that's kind of fun but difficult when talking to people about music theory is that, there's so many different ways to talk about the same thing depending on your background, who you're, what kind of style you're playing. So yeah, for me, like those of you who've been around the channel know that I'm, I guess, more classical, at least in my studies, certainly, versus like film, I guess. Because what I've learned over the last couple of years is that like the film people that I run into now, people doing media composition, I should say, have their own lingo for things. And I was not even aware of some of the terminology for, just basic music concepts or music theory concepts. And it's really cool to interact with people, and they'll be, someone will be describing a music theory term or a concept, and I'll be like, wait a second. Oh yeah, I know what that is. I know it as something else. And you can point to, they might be pointing towards like some new film thing they're working on or a video game soundtrack or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I learned that from, Debussy or something. So that's really cool about music is a lot of, I know a lot of you are into media composition, and there's so much overlap though. I feel like most of what I teach is sort of based on my studies in academia, and but there's a lot of crossover, and so I think, yeah. So yeah, my favorite chord. What are some of your favorite chords? Greetings, David. How are you? Hope everyone's doing well today. Favorite video game soundtrack? So I'm a gamer, but I'm not like an avid gamer. I grew up, most my childhood was in the 90s, and I had like a PlayStation, Nintendo, so I have a nostalgia for those. I don't have as much nostalgia for the stuff that was in the 80s because I wasn't alive then. So like original Nintendo, even Super Nintendo, I didn't really play that much. So I know a lot of people have like, such a nostalgic relationship with some of those games and their music. For me, most of my favorite video game soundtracks are from stuff more recently. I haven't played the newest one, but the first God of War for the PS4. I think Bear McCreary did that, and that part of it was the story was so strong and compelling, but the music was awesome as well. Another one that I love, totally different, but the Alien Isolation game, if anyone's played that. And I think it was done by Christian Henson, at least maybe him and some other person, maybe even his brother. So for those of you who don't know, the guy who's sort of like one of the co-creators of Spitfire Audio, he's a composer, and so that game came out probably a decade ago, but it's the scariest game I've played, just because if you know the Alien franchise with, Sigourney Weaver and that film series, they made a video game, and it was terrifying for me. And the music was amazingly, perfect for that game. A lot of times where I just had to stop playing because I was afraid. Not really, but yeah. Um, Cool Cat, favorite film soundtrack? Um, I mean, if you'd asked me when I was a kid, I would have said Star Wars for sure. I grew up, like a lot of people did, just idolizing John Williams and everything he did. Nowadays, I don't really have favorites, but um, certainly John Williams still has a strong place in my heart. Um, as I went into the more classical realm of music and during my studies in school, I didn't pay attention to current film as much. Um, so, that's just the nature of when you're a grad student, I guess. But I think later on in life, I've really found an appreciation for Bernard Herrmann. But there's so many great film composers, and Jerry Goldsmith, of course. Some of the older dudes who wrote music, so much good stuff. And I know on this channel I have a lot of supporters or subscribers who've followed me because of my Hisaishi stuff. His music's awesome too. It's funny, I get a lot of comments from people saying, you really like Hisaishi, right? To do all those videos on him. Yes, that's true. But to be honest, I didn't really know his music before starting that series. It just seemed like a thing to do, I guess. I don't know. I mean, once I started sort of diving into his music, I really started to love it. There's so much more depth than you might think upon just hearing it, because it is so accessible. And I think a lot of people, especially in academia and I'm sure other areas, think that if something is accessible, it must not be as sophisticated. And I totally don't buy into that, because I think the music that has an effect on me the most is music that is accessible, and yet the more you study it and listen to it, you realize there is so much depth. So I'll stand behind Hisaishi being a brilliant composer. But I have a lot of favorites, yeah. MH, how did you start developing your ability to orchestrate? That's a good question. So for those of you who don't know, I studied composition for over a decade in school at university level, 3 degrees. So I was there a long time. And yeah, I mean, there are some courses you take in orchestration along the way in the United States when you get a degree in composition, but a lot of the learning is on you. In other words, you have to put in the effort to learn, and the best way, and one of the things that is really great about being at a university is that you're surrounded by musicians. So you have that option. You can write for musicians, hear your music, realize the stuff that you did incorrectly or wrong or needs to be improved on, and you just keep at it. And you do that, dozens and dozens of times. And you start small. At least I did. I wrote for a lot of quartets when I started in school, and then eventually you start writing for orchestra. And I was not a good orchestrator at first at all. But and I still think I'm improving, to be honest. I still think every time, even anytime I make a YouTube video, I feel like I'm learning something. So yeah, I always like to be in a state of learning, I guess. I never feel like I know everything. So, yeah, any other questions? Okay, Entropy Addict. do I ever write away from the piano? I can't. So they're saying I can't play piano, and the sketches I write tend to lack detail and interest. Yeah, I think. So I personally tend to write at a piano just because I found a method that works for me. But I know a lot of great composers who can't play piano at all and who don't play any instrument. The one thing I will say is everyone does have an instrument if you want to use your voice. Sometimes when I'm not near a piano, not so much lately, but when I was writing a lot more several years ago, I would have a recorder, and you could just use your phone, but something to record your voice on the fly. And sometimes I would just sing rhythms to myself, sing pitches maybe. You don't have to have a good voice, but just getting some idea into a form that then can be, I don't know, transcribed later or edited later or something. So I will do that, and I've done that in the past. You need to have some method of getting the information out of your head into some, whether it's the DAW or notation program. So there's always some vessel or whatever that does that work. It could be a microphone. It could be, piano for me, I think generally. But historically it was just pencil and paper. So, if you've got that skill, you don't even have to, write traditional notation. You could sketch out in a method that works for you. But I don't think I answered your question entirely. Yeah, so I think it's all about finding what works for you. And when I teach a lot of students from all over the world, and a lot of them some of them can't even read music, which is totally fine. I mean, you don't have to read music to be able to write it. Read music in the traditional notation sense. And I just sort of help figure out a way that they can communicate their ideas into some medium, like, into the DAW or into notation software. Hi, Kevin. How are you? So Kevin says, I see folks on YouTube composing and orchestrating directly into the DAW. I find it difficult to craft good voice leading this way. I notate before inputting into the DAW. Your thoughts on workflow? So, so for me, I am, like I said, at the piano usually, and that's stage one. Often I generate ideas at the piano, and then I go into notation software. So I currently use Dorico. Back when I was a student, I would just go into practice rooms at the campus, and I didn't even bring a computer. I just brought pencil and paper, and so that's what I did. And there's something, I know it's like maybe a little antiquated, but there is something nice about writing it out on paper and not having all the details there. Like the instant feedback you get with a DAW is obviously very nice, but I also think there's a really cool step that you can take as a composer in your process where you get like part of the idea from your head onto pencil and paper, onto paper with pencil, and it doesn't have to be like a fully fleshed out idea yet. It can just be sort of the essence of something there, and I like that. I'll play back what I've written on piano, but I really enjoyed that sort of stream of conscious, sort of get some idea out onto the page, and then have to take that to notation software later. So that was sort of multi-step process that I did. And you sort of discover more about an idea, a musical idea, or a melody or a harmony, something like that, when you go through that process, I think. Now, having said all that, today, when I'm writing something today, I generally am at the piano at my, where I'm sitting right now at my desk, and I have Dorico open, and sometimes I even have a DAW open as well at the same time. And so I tend not to write as much by hand, but certainly if I was on the road and I had an idea, I would use pencil and paper. So people that can orchestrate and compose directly in the DAW, I'm always impressed by. Kevin, I sort of struggle the same way. Being able to see the music, I don't have as much a connection with how the DAW looks as I do with notation. I can look at a notated score, and hear it in my head. I can't do that with MIDI notation, MIDI view. But I know some people can. So it just all depends on what you can process, what you can do. I don't think one's better than the other. I'm not like a snob about notation. I think the end results speak for themselves, however you get there. And Dorico is cool. Dorico is awesome because it is sort of turning into a DAW in a way. So in one program, you can look at traditional notation, and then you can look at the MIDI view, which is great. MH, how do lessons work with you? Where can I get information regarding lessons? So I have a few different ways you can sign up for lessons if you'd like. You can go to my website, which there's a link on my YouTube. I don't know what it's called. YouTube About page, I think. And so I do lessons over Zoom. And I've got students from around the world. Like I said, with sort of varying degrees of abilities to read music or, play an instrument even. So. So FL says, after watching the end of the Mario movie, they featured a piece from the Galaxy game, and it hit me really hard with nostalgia since I played that game in my childhood. Give it a listen if you haven't. Cool, I will. Yeah, I didn't play the Galaxy game when I was... I don't know when that came out, but that might have been a little later. What console was the Galaxy game for? I haven't seen the movie, the new movie, but I've heard good things. Cool Cat says, will I ever do any videos about video game music? Yeah, sure. Yeah. My videos tend to be, more in depth about scores. Not that I couldn't do something like a video game, but I would have to probably transcribe some of the music and then do kind of an in-depth thing. Which would be cool. I think I'd be into that. The other thing about video game music is a lot of the new stuff it's sort of following trends in cinematic music that are, you know, half of what makes them awesome is that their sound design elements are so impressive, and I have less of a grasp of sort of that realm of composition. So anything to do with mixing, sound design, synthesis, all of that stuff. So it's not that I don't enjoy that. It's just I'm not as comfortable sharing my thoughts on that stuff because I don't have the expertise in that realm. So, but obviously there's tons of stuff to talk about just purely compositionally about video games and their music. So yeah, I would be down at some point, I think. Especially I think the older stuff, it would be fun to go back and explore some nostalgic stuff from my childhood and even earlier than that. Kevin, so is piano my primary instrument? Yeah, so I am, I don't know about primary instrument. I started on piano when I was 6 years old, I think. And then when I was in 3rd grade, I don't know how old I was, like 9 or something. Maybe 4th grade, I don't know. I played the saxophone. So I played saxophone, you know, probably that was my primary instrument when I got into high school age. And then I played saxophone all the way through college. And I was like, you know, into the jazz big band world. And I played a lot of jazz gigs all over town. I played piano too a lot, gigging, and I think my skill set was higher in saxophone when I was like a teenager. And then after undergraduate, so when I was about 21, 22, I went to graduate school, and that's when I sort of really committed to classical music in that realm of composition. And not that I stopped playing entirely, but saxophone definitely took a backseat to everything else, and piano became a much more important part of my sort of musical life at that point. And I've improved a lot, even though I stopped taking lessons back in high school, just because I used the piano so much. I got somewhat decent at it. So I would say nowadays piano is my primary instrument, but I have in the other room, I have a couple of saxophones that are waiting to be played. So I'm pretty rusty on saxophone, I think, but yeah, it's fun. I really like writing for saxophone too. So a lot of my earliest compositions were for saxophone or saxophone quartet. I just made a video actually where I mocked up a saxophone quartet piece that I wrote like a decade ago. And I just mocked up one movement from it. And yeah, it's a fun piece. Well, what do you think? Should I play some piano too? For those of you who just joined me, I have a piano. This is a VSL piano. Sebastian, how are you? He says, hi, Alex. In what order should I watch the playlists of your YouTube channel? Oh, good question. You know, I don't know. I would say, I mean, I sort of conceived of them obviously in the order that I created them. So I started with the Fundamentals series, which is like sort of a general overview of orchestration. So the Fundamentals of Orchestration is a playlist on my channel. That's sort of like an intro to, instruments, orchestral instruments. I have a few videos that were pretty, decently successful, I guess, that are sort of like, their titles are sort of like piano to strings or piano to winds. So if you haven't seen any of those videos, check them out. And then after that, I made a bunch of videos that were in the piano to orchestra series. And so that's, I usually generate an idea on piano and then I orchestrate it half a dozen different ways. And all those videos are, I think, very informative, or at least I hope they're very informative, but they're very dense too. So a lot of my students that have contacted me over the last couple of years will say they watch those videos, they have to watch them over and over again, because that's just my style of teaching, I suppose, is I kind of get into like pretty intense detail about things. So yeah, it can be, hopefully it's not a chore to get through those, but there's a lot of good information. So I would start at the beginning. So just go back to my earlier videos and watch some of those. Yeah. FL, sax player. Cool. What's my favorite type? Well, I started out on alto sax, and then I switched over to tenor. So I guess tenor would be my favorite. I'm a huge, Coltrane fan. Wayne Shorter, Stan Getz. I think my favorite players tended to be tenor players. I also really like the soprano saxophone too. I think too much of it, it can be annoying. But in small doses, I really like the soprano sax. It's also the hardest to play, in my opinion, for whatever reason. Maybe it's because the soprano saxophones that I played, maybe it's just, harder to make a soprano saxophone that sounds good. But yeah, I don't know. Tenor, I guess, probably be my favorite. Hip hop. I did ask this once, but do you have experience writing for choir and orchestra together? I would very much love to see a video on how to write for choir and orchestra together. Do I have experience? Not really, actually. But that's something I'd be interested in. I know I wrote for choir a lot when I was a student. I had several choir pieces performed. When I was in high school, there was a time when Eric Whitaker, if you know him, was writing a lot of music, and my high school choir sang a lot of his stuff. And so I was into that for a bit. And obviously orchestra, separate from choir, but I've never actually written for the two of them combined. I suppose probably writing for like sample stuff. I've done some orchestra stuff with choir, but I don't really have a good choir sample library either. In fact, I know there are some good ones, but I've never been really blown away by anything that's available. I don't know. Until like the word building stuff becomes really, really powerful and effective, I don't know that I'll invest in a choir library, to be honest. John, how do I decide which of the 3 possible triad chords for a single melody note to use in a piece? Or how do I? Okay. I feel like that's a good question. So just I'll maybe move towards a little more broad of a topic there. How do I harmonize a melody in general? I think there's an intuition that I have, and that intuition comes from years of studying and playing piano, obviously, too. So I'm, I talk on my channel a lot about like strategies for harmonizing melodies, and I stand by all that. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's just a feeling too. Play a melody and play chords, and it feels right. That's what I go with. And so, if you're dealing with just if you have a melody and you're looking to harmonize with just one of 3 triads, I guess my advice would be, make decisions about the frequency of any of those triads. So over the course of a melody or a melodic phrase, the harmonic motion, the harmonic form, should be interesting on its own. So if you say you're in the key of A minor, you start, maybe the melody starts on an E, and then you stay on A minor. Then you go to C major, and then, maybe the melody goes back to that E again. And so you have to decide, are you ready to move on to something else, or do you need to return to your initial chord of A minor? So there's a harmonic form there in music. Music is a linear, we experience it, on a linear scale. So, if you're just always moving around and you never go back, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but I'm always thinking independently about every aspect of music, I guess. So melodically, harmonically, rhythmically, and how the individual harmony chords or chord progression, how does it operate, and is it interesting? If I were just to play the chords alone, is it interesting, or does it repeat too many chords? Is there just, like, for whatever reason you decided to have too many A minors or something? So I kind of repeated A minor so often that there's sort of a static form there. It's not really going anywhere because it always returns home. And that obviously could be an effective harmonic form if the music demands something always returning back to your first chord. So I don't want to say, never do that. It's complicated because music, there's never really like good or bad necessarily concepts, but I think there are things that work better for the piece that you're writing. So again, going back to that instinct I have, a piece of music starts with an idea, a concept, and then every decision I make melodically, harmonically, has to do with how does it help me achieve that concept or realize that concept. So yeah, your question, it's a good one. It's hard to talk about, I guess, in just a sort of a live stream like this, but yeah. Hip hop, how also would love writing for piano in a symphony orchestra setting, as it feels a lot different than solo piano. Yeah, definitely is a little different. I would say if you're looking at early 1900s scores, a lot of composers started to use piano as a orchestral instrument as opposed to just a solo instrument. And so people like Stravinsky, Bartók, I don't know, Prokofiev, I'm sure. Yeah, so many composers from the first half of the 20th century started to use piano in a really interesting role, similar to how like a percussion section would be set up in an orchestra. So you'd have maybe some mallet instruments, right? Like marimba or glockenspiel, or piano. You know, piano would be kind of a part of the percussion section. And that really wasn't a thing in the classical era. If piano was going to be in an orchestra piece, it was going to be as the featured soloist. So at some point in time that changed. And so you obviously, like when you're writing for piano and orchestra, where the piano is just an orchestral instrument, you have to take things into account, especially if you're writing for a realistic mix. In other words, like, you know, the piano will probably be positioned way back in on the stage, and there are certain things that just won't be heard. Like, it's a pretty quiet instrument unless you're really playing fortissimo. So there are things that are just not effective if you've got a lot of other instruments playing. But it can be a really interesting. Obviously, piano can do things that not a lot of other instruments can do. So yeah, there's tons to explore. I'll be definitely doing more of that kind of thing in future videos. Sebastian, I want to learn, but the content of the internet is so huge that I don't know where to start. Could you recommend some books or media content that have helped your career as a composer? Thanks for the question. Yeah, so it's hard because without knowing more about you and what your goals are, and you know what your current skill set is in terms of you know, reading music, working with software, all of that. Just as a general, I always tell my students the first thing, or I always ask them what kind of music do they listen to, and then it's sort of, I get a sense of maybe what kind of stuff they want to be writing. So a lot of my students are aspiring film composers or just want to write some classical sounding music. And I think the most important thing is just to be just to listen to as much as possible. So there's a trick there. When you listen, as opposed to instead of being a passive listener, where you just turn on some music and listen in the background, you really have to be an active listener and study as much as possible. So that means rewinding, going back and listening to something over and over again. And then if you're able, transcribe the music, play it back on an instrument. If you've got piano or some polyphonic instrument like guitar or piano or something, being able to feel out the notes of the music is such a crucial step in being able to then process that in your brain and then being able to write your own, I think. So in terms of content, I think the best thing you can do is just find as much music out there and be an active listener. For me, when I was studying throughout school, I was just finding all the scores that I could get my hands on and studying them. And so a lot of it was contemporary stuff when I was in school. But honestly, there's so much stuff that's in copyright now, or out of copyright rather, that's sort of free to download on the internet. So IMSLP is such a great resource. And I don't want to say like everyone has to be able to read music and understand notation, but that was how I got to where I am now, for sure, is being able to study scores and understand what's happening. Yeah, so I recommend that over any textbook. And it is, I'm not saying this just because I'm a teacher, but it also is nice to have a mentor of some kind. I had some great mentors and composition teachers over the years, and sometimes just having someone to steer you in a direction can be pretty useful. Kevin asks, what will be the overall approach and outline presented in my upcoming orchestration course? Yeah, so I haven't really talked about it much, but over the last 6 months, really, I've been working on an orchestration course, and it's a big one. It's taking up most of my week, maybe too big, in fact. But I've put so much effort into it. It's based on the fundamental series, basically, that I have on my YouTube channel. So that was an introduction to orchestration and introduction to the instruments. So I'll have a course coming out this year that's very, very in-depth on orchestration, but I'm also structuring it so that I think beginners can get something out of it too. So you don't have to already have written for orchestra. You don't have to know all the instruments. You don't have to use, Dorico. You don't have to use notation software even. A lot of my examples that I have, I'm showing both the MIDI and the notation, and anyone who signs up for the course will get all of the MIDI files for all the examples that I have. So hopefully it's easy for a lot of people to get a lot out of it. At least I hope. And I should say also, I'm still working through this course, and I have a long way to go, but I am going to release it before it's done with an intro price, because there's already so many hours of content in this course that I think I feel probably pretty good about releasing it before it's completely done, and then I'll just add more chapters as I finish them. So yeah, stay tuned for that. I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a good one. John asks, what contemporary classical composers do I recommend? Man, that's a tough question. There are so many, and there are so many different styles now. I don't keep tabs on everything happening, so I don't even know really. And depending on where you are in the world, I'm sure there are, great contemporary music being written, and I don't even know about it. But, I don't think we've ever been in a time where there were more composers composing contemporary music. So it's exciting. Yeah, what are some of your favorite contemporary composers? And that could include any. I'm not going to limit that to contemporary classical. Just let's just say contemporary composers who are using, instruments, writing for instruments that are acoustic. And that could be writing in a DAW, but just for instruments like violins and stuff like that. So your question, I get stuck trying to write a second theme or an intro. The harmonies easy, but writing something that hints to the upcoming melody. I think that's one of the biggest, or like the most common question I get asked. How do you, once you have an idea, like where do you go from there? There are some really good videos out there on expanding a piece. I've got a few videos on my channel. I think I even have one called expanding like a 8-measure idea or a 4-measure idea or something. There are some other great YouTubers I know doing stuff on what to do after you come up with the first idea. Yeah, I think form is one of the hardest things about composing. Form meaning like when do things repeat and how often, and when do you do something new? So yeah, it's a tough question. Certainly, probably the hardest thing about composing, like I said, is form. So yeah, I don't know. There are some good books. Actually, someone mentioned earlier about books. One that was helpful in graduate school, and I've seen it, people talk about it on YouTube, is a book called Classical Form by, I think, William Kaplan, maybe. I can't remember the author. I think it's Kaplan. And that book analyzes Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, and specifically looks at phrase structure, melodic form, harmonic form, how things repeat. So it goes through all of the different, antecedent, consequent relationships, presentation, continuation. It's a very classical approach, but I think, and as some, if you guys know Ryan Leach's channel, I know he's done stuff on this Kaplan book because it's very applicable to all sorts of music, and you can take the same concepts of antecedent and consequent and apply it to, video game music and popular music and everything like that. So that's a pretty useful book if you're trying to figure out sort of how to get from one single idea to an ABA form or a tertiary form or sonata form, just expanding a single idea into several minutes of music. So that's useful. Let's see. FL asks, how do I like to make sure my my engraving is nice and clean? I'm assuming you mean like in notation software. Yeah, when I used to use Finale, that was a real chore. So that was, I struggled with that. And I've been doing it for so long that when I first started composing, I didn't even have like any notation software. They existed. Finale's been around for 30 some years or something, but I didn't use it when I was like a teenager, and I was writing music, and it was just all on paper and pencil. So I developed that skill first, how things should look. When I got to undergraduate school, assignments were often done with paper and pencil, and the theory professor would critique how things looked. So that was probably helpful for me. And then in the last 5 years, I switched to Dorico, and honestly, Dorico sort of does it all for you. But I still think you need to kind of know the rules about engraving. If you're interested, let's see if I have this book. Hold on. Sorry. This book here, this is Music Notation in the 20th Century by Kurt Stone. pretty useful in terms of how things should look on the page. So it's got, I don't know if it's completely up to date with current engraving trends, but certainly that's helped me. What else? Why is there so little analysis of Prokofiev's music, yet he's so popular? Do you understand his more chromatic composition style? Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's some good analysis of his music in academic circles. The problem with academic circles when I was a student is that you had like two what do I want to say? There were two groups of theorists who were talking about music. There was the group that was still concerned about music written in the 17 and 1800s, and so they were, finding new ways to analyze Beethoven, which, fine, good, great. And then there was the group that was concerned with stuff that was happening right now. So, if Kaya Sariaho wrote a new opera, you'd have a theorist talking about that. There was very little, I found, contemporary theorists talking about someone like Prokofiev, because his music was 100 years ago, which doesn't sound new, but it's also not old enough to be of like the old canon of classical music. I had a teacher in undergrad, and she was one of the world's experts on Stravinsky, which, he's, I guess, a contemporary of Prokofiev. And there's just a lot more theory, analysis on Stravinsky's music than Prokofiev's. And I don't know why that is. I guess Stravinsky was maybe pushing music in a direction more contemporary than Prokofiev was. I don't know. I love Prokofiev's music, though. And every time I hear something by him, I'm blown away. So I don't know. Maybe I need to look more into, like you said, his chromatic composition style. I was talking earlier about active versus passive listening. I've done a lot of passive listening of Prokofiev, but not so much active. And so I'll he's a guy that I need to check out more of. All right, how are we doing on time? I think I'll probably wrap this up in a little bit just because we're approaching an hour. Let me get some of these last questions. Let's see. A lot of those guys aren't even interested in Ravel. It blows my mind. Oh yeah, Ravel. Ravel is pretty dense. Hard to study unless you're willing to put in a lot of time, because his orchestrations are incredibly rich and complicated. So yeah, I don't know why people don't check out Ravel more. I don't know. One of the greats. Hip hop. Usually I'm more interested in your take on things like how to write for choir or piano and such, because I really like your style in teaching. Well, thank you. I'm glad you like my teaching style. Yeah, like I said, I hope to do more on choir. And like you just said, a lot of people right now are talking mostly on YouTube about epic music. And that's not really my thing. So yeah, I think how to write for choir with orchestra in I don't want to say academic, because I'm not really into academic music so much, but into more of a concert way, I guess, concert music. In fact, there's a piece that I'm going to make a video in the next couple of weeks about so I have a new series that I've started a while ago, but I haven't really done many videos on it. It's called Orchestrating Textures. And at the time when I started it, the idea was that my patrons on Patreon would send me compositions and then I would orchestrate them and talk about like how to expand a simple idea into an orchestration. And I got some great, some of my patrons sent me great stuff. I didn't get too many submissions though, and I don't know. I felt that it was kind of hard to take a student's composition and then within like a reasonable time make a whole video on some texture that I found that would work for their piece. So the whole idea was that I would use like contemporary classical or concert classical. Like I think I used Mussorgsky as an example in one of the videos I made. So his actually Ravel's orchestrations of pictures at an exhibition I used as a model for how to create a texture based on that. So I want to do more of those videos. I want to do more simple ideas and then modeling orchestral textures on things that exist. So Prokofiev's orchestrations, Ravel's orchestrations. And your comment about choir, there's a composer, William Walton, I think English composer. In the States, he doesn't get a lot of attention. He came from that sort of post World War I era. And I can't remember the piece. It's I don't know. There's a huge choral piece that he did with orchestra, and it's got some amazing moments in it. So stay tuned for a video that I do on using choir and orchestra, maybe from that piece. All right, a few more questions. Gregory says, how do you deal with more than standard articulations in Dorico, such as the Pteris Vasque gestures? Do I make my own expression maps and playback templates? Yeah, so that's a good question. First of all, since getting Dorico and using Dorico, I probably don't write a lot of like modern gestures as much as I used to when I was in school. I wrote a lot of sort of experimental, contemporary compositional techniques, and at the time I used Finale, and Finale was you were able to kind of do anything. It was very freeing in the sense that you could notate anything you wanted to, but you obviously wouldn't play back necessarily. So Dorico is focused more on standard techniques, and so they haven't really made a lot of progress in sort of non-standard, like you said. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience trying in Dorico because I think it is difficult, and certainly getting things to play back, I'm not sure. A lot of those techniques, I don't know this Pteris Vasque library yet. I haven't checked it out yet. But yeah, I've struggled with that as well. How do you notate that stuff in a program? So yeah, I don't know. I think you have to use a DAW. Well, yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Maybe I am going to do another one of these live streams on Friday, so this upcoming Friday. I know some of you, aren't able to make this time or Friday afternoon, so I'll chat again, hopefully with some of you on Friday and a few more of you that are listening after the fact. I'll keep this live stream up, and for those of you watching after the fact, thanks so much for watching. Yeah, it was fun, and have a good one, everybody. I hope you all have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and yeah, see you then. Bye-bye.